Good evening, students. This evening we will be taking notes on the problems that were facing the Founding Fathers when it came to drafting the Constitution. Please take notes on the problems that faced the American government at the dawn of our country in your composition book. Organize your notes by stating what the problem is and then record the possible solutions to these problems. Each one will be gone through thoroughly, and you can number them 1, 2, and 3. Alright, thank you very much. The first problem that was facing our country was representation. Representation means who is going to represent the people when it comes to government, who is going to give them their voice. The second problem facing the American country was the issue of slavery, whether it should or should not be protected by the Constitution. And then the last problem was the balance of power. Where should power lie, with the state or the federal government? For each one of these sections, we will discuss the opposing viewpoints, and we will discuss what their solution to the problem was. So please label this as your first major problem, and the first major problem is representation. Representation means who should represent the people in government, who should be their voice. How should they be represented, and where should those representatives come from? There was competing interest in this. There was small states that wanted equal footing with the larger states, and the larger states wanted to make sure that all of their citizens had an equal voice to those from the small states, and that the small states did not have a larger voice due to the actual size of the state. Now, the solution to the representation problem came in the form of two competing plans. One was put forth by the larger states, and it was called the Virginia Plan, hence Virginia being the largest state in the country. The other was put forth by the small states, named the New Jersey Plan. Each one of these called for three branches of government: a legislative branch that would make the laws, an executive branch that would put those laws into power, and a judicial branch. However, the devil lay in the details. The first plan, the Virginia Plan, put forth by James Madison, called for two houses of legislature. The legislative branch is the branch of government that makes laws. He asked for each of these houses to have representatives based on the size of the population of the state. There would be an upper house and there would be a lower house. The upper house would be based on wealth, the lower house based simply on population. The legislative powers would be able to tax the people, enforce laws, and regulate commerce. Nothing too revolutionary here, but the small states had issue with the representation. The New Jersey Plan was different. It asked for only one house of legislature, and each state would contribute one representative to that house. Therefore, there would only be 13 representatives for the entire country. They felt that this was fair because this way larger states would not dominate over the smaller states such as New Jersey and Connecticut. The powers essentially would be the same. They would tax foreign trade, and they would regulate commerce. They were unwilling, however, to make laws. Under the New Jersey Plan, the powers of what would be called Congress would be much more limited than the powers in the Virginia Plan. After these two are put forth, they come up with a great compromise between the two, which essentially blends the idea that one of the houses in the Virginia Plan would be two representatives for every state, thus making them equal, where the lower house would be representation based on population. Therefore, they would have equal representation where the small states may be able to dominate the upper house, but the larger states would be able to hold the lower house, thus balancing it out. My question to you is, which one do you believe makes more sense? The second major problem facing the United States as it was becoming a country was the worst thing that the United States has ever done, and that was slavery. Should slavery be protected as a right in the Constitution? Should slaves be counted as people even though they are considered property? Should states have to pay for their slaves in taxes as they would pay for anyone else? There was a lot of competing interests. Many people wanted to get rid of slavery completely. Others, however, wanted slavery as their property rights, their economic interests, and they wanted this protected by the American government. Unfortunately, the non-slave people sacrificed both their integrity and morals and business interests in the issue of slavery in order to make our country function. The issue of representation was dealt with first. Southern states wished for slaves to be counted as part of their representation to determine the number of representatives they got in the House, but they opposed them to be counted as determining their taxation. Northern states wanted the opposite. They did not want them counted as representation, but they did want Southern states paying taxes for them. What they came together with was the 3/5 compromise. The 3/5 compromise essentially said that 3/5 of the slaves would be counted towards population and also taxation. In essence, what this said is 3 slaves was equal to the number of 5 white civilians. In essence, 3/5 of a person. Unfortunately, this is one of the biggest blights in the face of the United States history. Slave states, major slave states at the time were Maryland, Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia. There were 2 other main issues facing slavery during the Constitutional Convention. The second major issue was the slave trade. Should the American Constitution protect the rights of the people to import slaves? This was another sticking point, especially with states like South Carolina that depended on a fresh supply of slaves continuously because they treated them so bad. They were not willing to sign the Constitution unless this right was protected. Thus, the right was protected up until 1808. The next one was the Fugitive Slave Act. People wanted the Fugitive Slave Act in the Constitution to once again protect their property rights. They felt that they had access to their property no matter where that property went, even if it did escape to free areas. Essentially, given that slaves were considered property, if a slave stole himself from his master, the government of any state where that slavery is outlawed should be forced to return that slave. This is also a constitutional protected right. Unfortunately, this did in a way violate the laws and rights of the citizens of free states who did not want slavery in their states by forcing them to cooperate with those of slave states. The last major problem facing the country was the balance of power. Where should power lie? Should more power be reserved for the state governments, or should more power be given to the federal government? As we remember with the Articles of Confederation, the federal government had no power whatsoever and therefore was a complete failure, where the state governments had all the power and were not willing to share. The competing interests were essentially, should the power lie within the hands of the wealthy elite who were educated enough to wield it responsibly, or should the power lie in the hands of the masses? Many believe that this would lead to violence and an ineffective government, just as it did during the Articles of Confederation. More than any one issue, this was probably the most hotly debated, with essentially the convention dividing into 2 different groups. Federalists, who felt that the federal government should rule over the people, with sharing powers with the state, an issue called federalism, and the Anti-Federalists, who essentially believed the opposite. The Federalists were led by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, and they attempted to get favor for their side of thinking by writing a series of essays that would become known as the Federalist Papers. What they favored was property owners and landed rich merchants in northern states should essentially be the voice of the people. They believed in elitism, seeing that some people were better than others, and they saw themselves as that, and they were the ones that were most fit to govern. They wanted a powerful central government with the two houses of legislature, which would bring together the voices of all the people, but the Senate being the most powerful one, and the Senate being the one reserved for the wealthy. The Anti-Federalists were led by Thomas Jefferson and George Mason, although Thomas Jefferson was not at the Constitutional Convention. They favored what we would call yeoman farmers, shopkeepers, and laborers. They believed in the decency of the common man and the participating in democracy. They believed that they developed closer ideals to true democracy, and they thought elites were corrupt, and essentially they would only work towards their own best self-interest. They wanted stronger state governments, and they wanted this at the expense of the federal government. They wanted frequent elections, smaller districts, and more participation from the normal people. By doing this, they would bring more people into government and therefore make it truly a government for the people, by the people. If you would, recap now and answer these three questions. Which plan for representation do you agree with most, the Virginia plan or the New Jersey plan, and why? What problems in the future are going to arise from the fact that slavery is protected in the Constitution? Think 10, 15, 20 years, 60 years down the line from the Constitution. How will this affect our country? And then lastly, which governmental philosophy do you favor, the Federalist or the Anti-Federalist, and why? Should power be held with the elite at the federal level or with the normal people at the state level? Thank you for listening, and we will discuss these tomorrow in class.